This is Third Paradigm, and I'm Teresa Caraggio. Today, I'm going to be talking about James Corbett, and I know that I am so late to this party, but I am loving James Corbett. He is funny. He is so well informed. His technology capabilities and production values have me green with envy. It is so entertaining. He's quick, and maybe most importantly, he is logically consistent. He's not only logically consistent within his own framework, but he's logically consistent with mine. I haven't found a place yet, and granted, I am only 4 videos in, but so far, I haven't found a place that he disagrees with my core dogma that I'm no better than anyone else. All of his different platforms seem to be ones that work with mine, including looking at things like decentralization and even investigating World War I and World War II. As viewers know, I have in several episodes been questioning the official narratives of World War I and World War II. And I've been slogging through, it must be said, The Karma of Untruthfulness by Rudolf Steiner on World War I. One of the things he says, though, is that as a journalist, if you are open to your karma, it will lead you to the answers and the right questions, and that information will fall into your hand. And that's been my experience on many of the topics that I've pursued. It's almost more as if they've pursued me, and I've merely decided that I will be receptive to them. In this case, as I was asking this question, I happened upon an Unz review of something that Ron Unz, who does that, has put together on American Pravda, I think it's called. And that looks at all of these different narratives of World War II and how they have been suppressed. One of the books that he reviews is called Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War. And this isn't a new book. This is a book that is over a decade old. And I'm going to be going into much greater depth about that in another episode. But then, to my surprise, I listened to an interview of James Corbett in which he and Chris Knight, where they trade off different facts from that very same book. So this is something that I think is converging in a way that I cannot resist, and I will continue to follow that thread in the future. In this episode, I want to talk about an interview that James did with Truth Over Comfort, which was on Obama, Trump, Q, Musk, and Hopium. What is Hopium? Hopium is this idea that we can just trust that things are going to be okay, and if we vote for the right candidate, that's going to fix everything. So I think that there is a distinct relationship between Hopium and heroes, that Hopium is what allows us to buy into heroes. So what's the opposite of Hopium? What's the opposite of hope? Is it despair? Is it to be black-pilled, as the term that Malone has weaponized against the Bregans? Or is it something that is more bleak than that? I don't think so. I think the opposite of hope is responsibility. To give one example, I've been talking a lot about the weather. So I can look out at these days on end, that have been white sky for 2 weeks now since I've been back in California. And I can just say, like little orphan Annie, oh, well, the sun will come out tomorrow. And that would be hopium, especially if I'm tying that to the idea that someone like Daddy Warbucks is going to save me. As a segue, was that intended as political satire to have Daddy Warbucks? I know that there's the real person that he represents, but have we ended up neutering that as a political commentary and turning it into something like we did with The Wizard of Oz, or as we did with the game Monopoly, where these were things that were showing things the way that they really were, and instead we said, oh, cool, let's play this thing. Let's be entertained by this. Let's turn this into a fairy tale. So dystopian analogies have perhaps been turned into something that's exactly their opposite. What would be the opposite of waiting for the sun to come out and trusting in Daddy Warbucks? The opposite would be taking responsibility for researching what's really going on, looking at this and saying this is not normal, being observant and paying attention to our own senses, and then doing the research to figure out what is it that's actually happening so that we can be speaking the truth and seeing the truth. In another episode I watched this morning, James talked about the global pandemic treaty is a threat to us all. And in that, he talked about the goal being decentralization of health authorities rather than going in this direction of one health, no matter who's in charge. Instead, looking at how do we take control at a level of individuals, families, and communities. In an anecdote to illustrate this, yesterday I was in my dance class, and there's one particularly fearful guy of COVID who insists on opening the door even when the heat is on. And so he did that, and as I've done before, I said, I don't think this is good for everyone else who is both sweaty and chilled, and I closed it again. Someone else went a little bit later and went to him and said, oh, I'm warm enough now, you should open it again. And they have also done that before. So here's the message that person was sending to me. Unlike you, I care whether Bob lives or dies. You may not care about our friend Bob, but I do. And so she was taking responsibility for his health. If, for instance, I had kept the door closed and then Bob happened to get sick, and let's say the worst happened and Bob died, whose fault would it be? According to that logic, it would be my fault because I was responsible for keeping the door open as he wished so that he could be in a densely crowded dance class and still be able to not take the same risk as everyone else. This is an insidious message that I think has created the last 3 years. What it said is, you're not responsible for your own health. I'm responsible for your health. I need to wear a mask because your mask, we're not going to say doesn't work, but maybe it can let through carbon dioxide and can let oxygen in because we need those, but it's not going to let those little virus molecules come in. And then we had to do the lockdowns so that even if we were willing to take the risk with our own health, We couldn't do that because we would be endangering other people who needed to have the same benefit that we who were taking risks were able to have, but who didn't want to have that risk. So kids who wanted to go to school, parents who wanted them to go to school, teachers who wanted to be there to teach them could not get together because that would leave out the people who were at highest risk, at least in their own minds, and it would end up being something that they couldn't take advantage of because we have to take responsibility for their health. And that has certainly been the message of the vaccines. Even if they're shown not to reduce transmission whatsoever, and if you're a trucker who's spending your whole day in your truck and not around anyone else, you still needed to get the vaccine in order to take responsibility for other people. And so I think we should change the name of the health freedom movement. I don't think that's really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a health responsibility movement, that we want to take responsibility for our own health, for the health of our families, and for the health of our communities. And this, I think, goes into everything. It goes into how we deal with education, how we deal with food production, how we deal even with the controversial climate change, that we as a community need to be able to decide these things for ourselves. And as a last comment, I think this is the critical question on these issues with Robert F. Kennedy and particularly with Robert Malone. If what we're looking for is to take responsibility for ourselves, we can only do that directly, but through our families, through our communities, we can only do that from the bottom up. What the fear is, and I think this is a very realistic fear, is that we're going to be buying into hopium once again. We're going to be looking for heroes to say, well, it's okay that it's all centralized as long as this person is in charge. And I don't believe that that is ever going to work. To follow this up, I'm going to suggest a couple of researchers who I think are right up James Corbett's alley, which is Matt Ehret and Cynthia Chung, Geopolitical Pros, and then also Thomas Frank misses the point of populism that talks about the Wizard of Oz. Thank you for watching.